What's the dumbest rule you've ever encountered at a job? Not allowed to call 911 is insane. I worked at a bar that had the same rule. If I need emergency services, that's who I'm calling. That the day manager can cram it. Story 2. No emails, texts, Slack messages, or any other written correspondence are to be sent to any clients or any outside the company contacts unless a member of senior management has signed off on said outgoing message. The email must be saved in your drafts, then printed and handed to a senior manager. The senior will read the email, stamp it, and sign with approval, and it will contain a document. If the email needs minor revisions, they will mark up the email and interoffice it back so you can correct and resubmit. If the email has major revisions, a meeting will be called to discuss. When you receive the signed and stamped email, you are to photocopy it for your own records and return the original to the senior staff's admin assistant. When you finally send the email, you must BCC the senior staff, BCC your immediate manager, and make sure you have placed the document number at the top of the email. They were very strict on this rule, and not many people got second chances, all to send an email. Story 3. The parking lot was far from the office. In the winter, I'd wear boots and change them once I walked up to the office door, but before entering. HR saw me and gave me a warning that the dress code begins at the moment we step foot on the property or are in eyeshot of the office. Story 4. I work at a warehouse, loading trucks in the shipping department. If you don't completely load the truck you're working on before the end of shift, the next shift gets credit for the entire truck, no matter how much of it you loaded. You can load 99% of it, just waiting on maybe 2 cases to be picked, and the next shift will get credit for loading that entire truck. Makes zero sense to me. Story 5. Well, I'm in the military, so where do I even start? Dumb rules are our entire personality. Walking on the grass? Not authorized. Wearing a hat in the hangar bay of an aircraft carrier? You better not. Unless it's in port, then you better be wearing a hat. Story 6. We have no clocks on the factory floor as management insists we should only need the buzzers to start and stop work, even though the daily routine calls for us to finish and clean down at the end of every shift ahead of the buzzer. Story 7. Probably having to get a doctor's note for calling in sick while working an hourly job that didn't give you sick time nor health insurance. So okay, I have bad diarrhea. I'm supposed to go to the doctor to confirm that I have diarrhea? Possibly poo my pants driving there? Assuming the employee even had a car. Pay out of pocket and not get paid just so you know I'm truly just having a bad poop day? I would quit on the spot if I encountered such crap, pun intended, again in my life. Story 8. We could have a shop radio, but couldn't plug it into the outlet. It might cause a power surge and take the factory down. Every 2 weeks, we'd pony up $5 for a fresh set of D batteries for the boombox. Story 9. No eating at our desk, which included any kind of drink. No coffee cups, cans of soda, or bottled water. We had a tyrant of a boss. Great day when he was fired. Story 10. At one time, there was a bin in every trash recycling room for aluminum cans. Some board member's wife set it up. She stopped doing it, so I decided to. Once a week, I would spend 10 minutes collecting the cans. I'd take them home and donate the money to help send children with terminal cancer to Disney World. One day, my tyrant of a boss decides that it's over, and if he sees me one time doing it, I am fired. The part that ducked me off about the entire thing was, this was supposed to be a Christian organization. Story 11. We couldn't use the term blackout to refer to a blackout period during which we asked for no changes to be made in the employee management system for a short period of time. I can't remember what we called it instead, but the old way wasn't friendly. Story 12. I worked at a music venue for a summer and a couple of the bands had weird rules. The one I remember specifically was that we couldn't watch Jimmy Buffett when they were getting set up before the show. Like, we'd get into position. That day I was a VIP beer tender, so I just had to bring the cups to our portable keg station thing and wait there. Then sit on the ground with my back to the stage until they were done. And definitely no taking photos while on the job. Well, duck 'em. I didn't need the job, so I broke both rules. I watched from around the side of my bar and I took a couple pics. Story 13. I worked for a company like that too. A lady fell down in the store. Another customer called 911. For some reason, I got the blame even though I wasn't there. They went on to say that the store got stuck with the bill because she tried blaming us, and it wasn't our fault. Didn't trip on anything, just her own feet. When I said I never called 911 and I wasn't there, oh, so-and-so said you panicked and called. Story 14. At a gas station, I had to clean up the oil drips at every parking space, daily. I had to salt the perimeter of the parking lot to expose the curbing, or chip and chop the ice away. And of course, food. Always thaw X amount of everything, because it was corporate standard. The bags and bags of food that I threw away every day and week. Story 15. 26 years ago, I was teaching at a Catholic in the next town over. They had a rule that you weren't allowed to go out on dates in our county because students may see you. That was just one of the many ridiculous rules for their teachers. Thank God, I got out of there after a year. Story 16. My sister worked in the bakery section at a grocery store. Employees were allowed and encouraged to taste test new products to be able to recommend to customers. They were allowed to taste only. They were not allowed to swallow the food. In my own, I did tech support for a while, which is obviously inbound calls. I've had calls drop before and have tried to get permission to call them back, but was always told no, because tech support is inbound only. Any outgoing calls get flagged. Anyway, a customer gave me a bad rating, which prevented me from getting incentive because the call disconnected on her end and I didn't call her back. I sent it in for an appeal and they rejected it, even though I was just following their policy. Story 17. One time I was on the phone and I told a customer that this is what my boss told me to tell you. Then my boss admonished me not to tell this person that my boss told me to tell them this, even though he was my boss and did in fact tell me to tell him this. That boss was truly one of the stupidest ducking idiots I ever worked for. Story 18. We had the only managers dial 911 at Lowe's when I was threatened by a shoplifter, and there were no managers or even department supervisors on site. Damn that rule. Story 19. Not the dumbest, but currently the most annoying. We can't punch in from any platform but an app. We can't even punch in on the physical computers, because that would make sense. The app also has a geo-reference setting that supposedly will prevent us from punching in or out too far from our workplace. I've been in the store unable to punch in even with a signal because I was out of range. Once we enter the building, we're in an internet dead zone. I might get lucky if I have 2 bars. The public Wi-Fi is a joke. We have to sometimes linger just outside the office hoping for a signal. It's not that complicated. Just let us punch in from the computers that are physically in the store. Story 20. Manager was substantially overweight, therefore she overheated easily. Unfortunately, we live in a place that gets to minus 40 degrees Celsius, so even inside can be damn cold during winter. She put a straight-up lockbox over the thermostat and no one was allowed to change the temperature. Even when she was taking 3 days off, a week, and hour-and-a-half lunch breaks every day, she was there. Then she also gave us crap for wearing multiple layers or scarves, saying it looked unprofessional. Quit that one with haste back when jobs weren't so scarce. Story 21. I did consultative sales. He had to call people and people called you, but took our lunches in our office. It wasn't really a lunch break. You focus at any time. You could call someone at any time. The vice president, Karen, comes down and says, for quality of work, life balance, she wants everyone to take the little break in the break room and not in your office. It's like Karen. I'm missing business seeing the break for an hour. If you didn't make your number, you could be fired. Story 22. Nobody leaves before the owner. Some days he'd leave early and it would work in your favor. Most days he'd stay until 6 to 6:30 and you'd just have to stay. I had zero predictability and was unable to have any social commitments after work because of the uncertainty of not knowing if the owner would be on a call until late. Story 23. The don't call 911 rule is at many retailers in the US. And it's stupid. We had phones at every register when I was a cashier in a grocery store, though they couldn't dial out unless calling 911. I called 911 a few times for customers. It would cause the supervisor and management phones to ring and listen in if they chose to do so, showing which extension called, but it would go through. If you're in a situation where you need to call 911, it's either a medical emergency or a robbery. And for robberies, we had a silent alarm under the cash drawer. In my case, it was always medical events. Story 24. No sticky notes allowed. I asked for some. Can't grab supplies yourself, of course, and was told anything you need to remind yourself of, you should already know. You were trained on this. There's no need to write it down, right? Story 25. At one place I worked, it was company policy that if we were out of stock on an item, which happened all the time, that we were not to offer recommendations where a customer might be able to buy that item. The stated reason from ownership for this policy is that we could not guarantee that a customer would be satisfied with their purchase if they bought it elsewhere. To suggest to a customer another place in town or online, even our own company website, that might have this item, was to risk getting fired on the spot. The company's site had a different URL from the brick-and-mortar store. That URL shared the name with a store at a different location out of state. As I'd find out after a few months on the job, the business had different vendor accounts for the website and that brick-and-mortar store. When one account went unpaid, they'd buy using the other. They didn't want word getting back to the purveyors, lest they decide to stop filling orders. It was without a doubt the shadiest, most dishonest, most toxic place I've ever worked. Ever since my time there ended, I've told people to not shop there. Story 26. I once worked at a summer camp that docked your pay if you missed a day. For example, I missed work on Wednesday to go to my grandfather's funeral. I drove back so I could go to work on Thursday, but I did not get paid for Wednesday or Thursday. So you can bet I did no work on Thursday. Story 27. Not allowed to install third-party software on work laptop. Even the meeting systems our client develops in-house. Had to lug around my personal laptop just to get work done. Story 28. If a woman wore pants to the office, you also had to have a suit jacket or sweater on. You could take those off at your desk, but if you walked away from your desk, you had to put them back on. Bathroom, put that suit jacket on. Getting a doc from the printer, put on your sweater. During the summer, women could wear sandless, not during the rest of the year. Men could not. So it's like 80 degrees in the office and a woman could be in sandless and a skirt and dressy top. But men, full dress shoes and socks, long pants, dress shirt, and a suit jacket if they stepped away from the desk. This was my first job out of college. And now you know why my next job was at a technology company with no dress code. Story 29. We had just moved into a building that the company had leased that had a previous tenant. It was actually their company's headquarters, so it had some pre-existing things like AEDs. One day we noticed that all the AEDs were taken down. We asked the building manager and he said something like, they were afraid that people didn't know how to use them and would use them incorrectly, which might get into a lawsuit. A couple of us spoke up that we were trained and let's get everyone trained. Fell on deaf ears. If you've never used an AED, it will take you a few minutes to learn. It's easier than CPR. Story 30. We were issued with a uniform, a two-piece suit, sweater, shirt, and tie. There was a choice of sweater, long-sleeved or sleeveless. We were allowed to take off the suit jacket and work in the sweater, but only while wearing the sleeveless one. Story 31. I worked in a call center, and they had specific rules on what you could have at your desk. Cubicle. We weren't well enough regarded to have desks. We were allowed to have one 5x7 photo hung in out box, as we called it. We were also allowed to have one motivational poster and a trinket of some sort. Like this corporate muddiness, not a word I know, would have drained what was left of the soul they desperately tried to crap on if I just didn't stop giving a duck. I hung nothing in my box. I did the job for the paycheck and helped customers as much and as often as I could. My monthly stats bonus disappeared, but my mental health and my soul were still intact. Duck you, Rick. Duck you, Jeremy. Duck you, Anne. Natasha, you're cool. Duck you, Teletech Story 32. I worked for a while in a huge shared office. Serious services like banks and insurances having their sections. They had no humor and took everything serious. One day we got a letter that is unbecoming, that we tilt the backrest of our office chairs, lift up the armrests, or do some rocking motion, especially when their customers go by our offices. We also have too much food on our table. Our bosses tried talking to them, but they wanted to escalate. He then told them he will find a solution. 2 days later, all the glass doors and section splitters had frosted privacy films on them. Story 33. My one company was over the top on safety. Someone cut their finger reaching in a drawer where they go cut. Company rule, had to wear safety gloves to get anything out of your desk drawers. We laughed. No one followed it. Story 34. I had a manager that insisted my font color in my email was non-standard and would constantly gripe at me about it. I literally didn't change anything from the standard auto color from Outlook. She also was mad. The spacing in my emails was wrong. This same manager wrote a bunch of us up for going home when it was declared a level 2 snow emergency outside. The day after a holiday, and she wouldn't call any of us back to go home. The weather was rapidly declining outside. So glad I left that awful place. Story 35. Used to work at a major music retailer that's now dead and gone. We couldn't have security cameras because one of the top dogs read about how a woman was D in a retail store aisle and nobody was watching the cameras, so she sued. Therefore, we can't have cameras because all the in-store S could create a risk for lawsuit. Story 36. I consulted at an insurance company. There was a director who needed an office, but there was only a VP office. So he got it, but he had to position his desk so his back was to the window. No looking out the window for you. Story 37. Worked for a very large transportation company in Orlando. I was threatened with being fired for using the term deadhead by an HR woman. It refers to moving a vehicle to a different location without passengers and is an industry term. Also, deadhead was used in the employee manual. It turns out the term deadhead, according to this moron, is an offensive term. I wish I was making this up. I use deadhead as much as possible, and people were loose their minds. Story 38. The last place I worked in that required a shirt and tie, I worked in it. Now I had a copy of the employee handbook, but I didn't read it in depth. I wore colored shirts and a matching tie and never got any flack for it. But apparently, there was a tie code. IIRC, it went like this. Red tie, top management only, big execs, yellow tie, middle management, black blue tie. Everyone else, orange, green, brown, or novelty ties were not allowed. Just by sheer chance, I wore a black or blue tie because it was all I had at the time, and while I could have gotten a different tie, I didn't want to. I never got flack about any of it. I didn't even know that was a rule, but its staff were partially feral anyway, so maybe that's part of it. One day, one of the project managers had to go home for an emergency. When he came back, he was really pissed off. Apparently, he came to work with a red tie and some head honcho saw it and dragged in HR to admonish him. HR, a grown adult, had to explain to this project manager that he was not allowed to wear a red tie, as it may confuse the staff as to his rank within the company. Apparently, this manager was offended that this PM dared to wear a red tie in some unprofessional power move. HR told him that tie color was outlined in the employee handbook, a 125-page PDF, and when we looked, sure enough, in a small byline about dress code, there it was. This was in 2015 to 2016, and it still stuns me to this day. Story 39. My daughter recently started a new job. She needs to learn Spanish because of the location in the Hispanic part of the city, so I bought her a gift subscription to Rosetta Stone. She often has significant downtime at work when things are slow, but cannot be seen looking at her phone. A customer, or the district manager, could walk in and get a bad impression. She also cannot do it on the work computers. There are only so many times per shift she can vacuum the floor. Story 40. My work got rid of the chess app on Windows computers at our workstations because they wanted us to be more bored while waiting for our CNCS to run. I quit soon after because duck that. Story 41. When I worked in tech at a well-known charge card company, the rule from security was we had to call them, not 911. They would call 911 for us. Okay, I follow rules, especially in emergencies. Coworker had a grand mal seizure at his desk. Just him, another coworker who was working late rare for him and me, were working second shift. I called security. 5 minutes later, they came into our room and said, "We'll call 911. I was shocked, asked the guy, "Why haven't you called 911 yet?" Security said they had to verify it was an emergency. Meanwhile, coworker is foaming at the mouth, foam on the carpet, writhing on the floor. I got coworker's work phone headset off 1990s and his rolling chair away from him. Security called main security desk to call 911. It was about 8 minutes total before security got to calling 911. The 911 crew were wonderful, got there in about 3 minutes, told security they were too slow and should have called 911 sooner. That was when I decided I'd never call any in-house security department again, that I'd call 911 first. I'd call security after to let them know 911 was called. Coworker refused to cooperate with medics, which medics said was normal. Coworker would only talk to me, someone he knew. When medics had a question, I had to repeat it to coworker to get answers. He was epileptic, drank beer all weekend, didn't eat properly or sleep enough, plus hadn't taken his meds since Friday. This was Monday evening. 911 said, that's why the seizure was so bad and he was lucky to be alive. I finally took off once coworker was cooperating with medics. Took a half-hour walk around the neighborhood, de-stressing, looking at houses, trees, flowers, and the sky. Coworker was okay after an hour with medics. His father was there to pick him up. Father was pissed with son and brought med with him, so coworker was given med and went home with his father. I had a bottle of tequila in my car, which I parked in the street, no booze on campus rule, so I had a discreet head-clearing sip or 3 or 4 before going back to work. Shift ended at midnight. It was only 7 p.m. I will call 911 first now. Story 42. I had a non-customer facing office job where you had to tell everyone when you left your desk ever even for a couple of seconds. If you had to step out to use the restroom, you had to announce the office that you were going to the library. It was at a university and the bathroom was located in the library right next to us. Story 43. I've encountered the same 911 rule once. I still would have called. At the time, I still had my respiratory therapy license, and by not calling it would jeopardize my license. Long explanation. Legally, I had to stay within my practice guideline. Therefore, I would have called despite company rules. Story 44. No verbatim. Don't document everything a customer tells you into a file. I work in insurance. I've had clients scream, yell, curse at me, non-stop, racial profanity. Play the race card. Call me dozens times a day to harass me, try to track my address and location, and threaten to sue or call the state for more money. But don't document what they say. We don't want to offend our client. Story 45. No flip-flops allowed. The main coworker guy, who everyone loved, wore flop-flops every ducking day. I wore them once and got sent home to change. I called the boss out, and she said she didn't care what Michael does. She's focused on me right now. It was actually a good rule, but the enforcement was dumb. I'm glad I called her out, though. The other guy, Michael, kept wearing flip-flops. I did not. Duck that place. Story 46. I'd say the bookstore manager who said any cafe employee who had a drink from the coffee shop had to tape their receipt to the cup, because it never occurred to him employees could sneak refilling the same cup. Story 47. I worked phone line, taking calls and tech support for the largest hobby company in the world at the time. This was pre-internet. Customers called to place orders from catalogs. We had no walk-in business and nobody else besides phone sales. Tech staff came through our building. The only dress code was that no words on clothing except if it was University of Illinois related, then it was okay. Shirt with the brand name on it, nope. I once wore a sweatshirt for another college and had to turn it inside out. That was okay. Story 48, I worked at a nonprofit where the director had the don't call 911 rule. She lived in fear that we'd have to pay for an ambulance. Not true. When I became director, it was one of the first things I changed. Shortly after there was an incident, and I asked if anyone had called 911. I got, "Oh, you were serious" comments. Story 49, dumb rules at a job. Everyone who has been in the military can tell you all kinds of stories, like how I was issued the most comfortable and practical jacket and forbidden to wear it. Story 50, a company I worked for had some issues with 1 or 2 workers not clocking out during lunch. Their response? No eating outside of lunch for anyone. It was a driving job, more or less. Even candy was forbidden. There were dash cameras that our vehicles have that also had the inward-facing cameras to watch us. If you were caught even eating a candy bar, you would get a phone call and a write-up right there on the spot. No questions asked, written up. They would watch you constantly and nitpick even the positioning of your gear in your truck. They would also go over phone call logs and chat logs daily to see who was complaining, and if they were caught complaining, they got written up too. Lots of malicious compliance ensued, and within a year, almost the entire team quit. Story 51. Many years ago, I was working at a distribution center, and some floss were caught blocking the aisles with their forklifts and chatting on the phone. Night shift, mostly. Management decided to ban everybody from bringing personal cell phones inside. Story 52. I once worked at a government facility that had different government agencies on site. We had stickers our cars to drive into the facility. However, if you worked late beyond the established working hours, you had to sign out with name, address, make, model, license plate number of your vehicle. The real kicker in stupidity was that this facility had a couple of fields at least to youth soccer. If you were a soccer parent, you could come and go as you please while there was soccer going on. No signing in or out. However, if you're a legitimate employee, even with a high clearance, you were treated like a criminal for working late. Story 53. I had one job, working for a cleaning company, where a manager forbade all talking on shift, for any reason. You need a spray bottle from a coworker? Time for charades? It lasted until a client tried to chat, got ignored, complained to head boss, and then the manager's rule spilled out. Same job tried to prevent people giving witness statements when an employee was SA'd on the job. Story 54. Worked at a Burger King where they said you couldn't check your schedule while on the clock. They would post it days late to the point where you didn't know if you'd be working in 2 days or not. Then they wouldn't let you check it until you clocked out. I didn't last long at that place. Story 55. We aren't allowed to use the no sale button on the registers. No sale is only to be used during a robbery, and if you hit it by accident, which is common due to its placement, you have to fill out detailed paperwork on why you pressed it. And the store manager is also required to do paperwork on how they retrained and admonished you. You might ask, what do you do if you accidentally close the till without giving change or need to open it for a valid reason? You have to use the move register procedure, which logs you off the register and pops out your tray. Then do the log back in procedure. Takes a minute or two if it goes smoothly. You might ask how it goes unsmooth. The registers have 2 drawers for cash trays. They auto-assign in order of logging in. If you happen to be in the bottom drawer and there's no longer anyone in the top drawer, when you log back in, the system expects you to go in the top drawer. To complete the logout process, you have to close your drawer, which, if you're doing this to get around the no sale button rule, means you leave your tray in the drawer and just close it. But if there's no one in the top drawer, then you just locked your tray in the bottom one as the system thinks it's empty now. You have to either do a complicated switching around of people moving registers or get the special tool from the safe to open the drawer. But hey, no paperwork. Story 56. I have a slight criminal record due to teen stupidity. I'm retired from the military with 24 years of holding a top secret clearance. As a contractor, I cannot enter a military facility due to my background check. All I do is pull to the gate, show my retired ID, and it's, "Welcome, sir." Story 57. We got a new timekeeping system last year. We have hundreds of stores in the province. Previously, we filled out a paper timesheet. There were issues with time theft under the paper system. Under the new system, you punch in and out on a tablet. It works like most of these systems where there's a grace period before and after your start time where the system will automatically round your punch to the right time. For some mind-boggling reason, managers and lifers don't understand this. They expect you to punch out at the exact time. Otherwise, they believe they have to manually change it in the system to avoid a variance. No one can explain properly why they do this. When I show them the training SOP on how the system works and explain how it works from my decades of using systems just like this, they just change the subject. I work at a bunch of stores and get talked to at least once a month about punching in 2 minutes early or punching out 1 minute late. Also, if I need to leave 15 minutes early or something less than an hour, they will manually put me in as punching out on time, So much for stopping time theft. Story 58. Not allowed to give CPR to guests. Because in the past, a server saved an older woman via the Heimlich maneuver and she sued him for breaking her ribs. Story 59. I've had some dumb ones in the past when I worked retail. I worked at the cheap and somewhat litigious kids' jewelry store. They held in-store competitions for staff to see who could sell the most upsell items, but you couldn't win the award 2 months in a row or more than 3 months in a year. I was the only one who upsold, and there were months we just didn't give out the award because I had already won it or whatever. At another store I worked at, any sale over a certain dollar figure had to be approved before we could run a credit card transaction, which would lead to us trying to call the store owner for approval on the weekends and not getting a response, so the customer would often walk out. This was because CC companies charge a percentage over a certain dollar value and not a flat fee, and the owner was cheap. At a pet store I worked at, we could not demand that an owner clean up after their pet. If they offered, we could accept, but we couldn't make them. Also, it took a woman bringing a puppy with fixing parvo and crap everywhere for the owner to let us tell people to leave, ban them. This owner even knew her dog was sick. It was awful. We locked the doors against protocol and called the local vet we worked with, and they brought over antiseptic and left it out front for us to avoid cross-contamination. We, myself as the assistant manager, the manager, and a third key, spent the next 4 hours power cleaning and sanitizing the store top to bottom to try and make sure we weren't an outbreak spot. Story 60, restaurant. We were only allowed to drink water or unsweet tea. Sweet tea and soda needed to be paid for in advance, in full. Additionally, drinks were not allowed to be in a to-go cup, as the plastic cups were so expensive. I was the dishwasher, so if I wanted to keep a glass of water handy to stay hydrated, the open glass would be exposed to all that nastiness found in the back kitchen. Outside drinks were also not allowed. I maintained a good relationship with the waitstaff, and they'd often bring back a glass of soda if the manager was busy. Story 61. I wasn't allowed to have my earbuds in while at the office on Fridays. I was the only one in the office, and we weren't open to the public. I literally had to work in silence, which drove me crazy. Story 62. Customer, I was a contractor, insisted on 100% tie-off using 6-foot shock-absorbing lanyards connected to a beam located 12 feet off the floor, until I pointed out that not hitting the floor is impossible. The lanyard expands to 12 feet as it arrests the fall. When it comes to safety or environmental, check your brain at the door. Story 63. I had a friend who worked for a boss who was genuinely evil. He had a rule that if there was a robbery, you weren't supposed to hand over the money because chances of anything happening are slim. This is after an employee was shot to death during a robbery. My friend got robbed while working at one of his stores. She was the only one there. She's very petite, and the guy was huge. The guy also told her he had a gun. She hands over the money, maybe $400, and he leaves. Her boss goes ballistic. He tells her he reviewed the security footage and could tell the guy didn't really have a gun. He threatened to make her reimburse the money. She walked. Story 64. I worked at a Japanese RAN company, US headquartered South Atlanta. Same crap if there was an accident or recordable. They had their medical staff take you into a room and check you out. It wasn't clean or anything. I thought that was weird. No 911 type thing too. Only stayed 3 months. Story 65. I had a job one time in a warehouse. During a bi-monthly safety inspection, the HR person conducting the inspection asked me, what steps would I take in case of a fire? I was lying on the floor under a machine, adjusting it at the time, so I sarcastically responded, big ducking ones that way, while pointing with a wrench. Apparently, I was supposed to respond in a more professional way. Who knew? Story 66. I was an assistant dorm attendant at an all-girls Christian boarding school. One of the girls was very beautiful, but picked on for being a slut. She would brush her teeth in the shower stall to avoid everyone else. The head dorm attendant made a rule that no one could brush their teeth in the shower because it would clog the drains. Story 67. Worked in a shared office, long story, where the other company was not allowed to be on their phones ever. Truly, that guy ran his company like he was in charge of children and had to tell them no phone. I heard him on multiple occasions say, that message you're typing better be to me, when he saw someone using their phone. I understand having a phone policy. Every company I've ever worked for did. But he took it to a ridiculous level, especially for how small of a company it was. I know how much those people were making, and it certainly was not worth that. Story 68. Well, the hotel that I worked at had previously been in trouble for not allowing staff their state-mandated breaks. So regardless of how busy we were in the restaurant or room service, we were forced to punch out 30 minutes for lunch, dinner break. So essentially what they did was swap one illegal action with another, because we would regularly be busy and not able to take lunch, but still be forced to punch out. Sometimes we forgot to punch back in, and when that happened, we were admonished for being irresponsible, for not punching back in after our mandated break Story 69. During COVID, we had to do an online survey every day to see if we were allowed to work. If we felt well, no recent contacts. We were not allowed to do this at home before our shift. If we were sick, we were directed to come into work to do our survey, and then the survey would tell us to leave. Story 70. Worked in a factory that had the same call manager in event of emergency rule. Then we had a training session on what to do in emergencies, given by insurance company covering our plant. The insurance rep told us, "Whose dumbest idea was that?" when told about the rule. Everyone pointing to the purchasing manager who had all the plant control. Next day, new policy. Story 71. I worked for a company for 10 years that had the rule to call the security guard shack number, but never 911. There were several emergency calls over the years. When one happened in my area of the factory, I called 911, and someone else called the security guard. The company never found out, but it was a fire-able offense. Most people there had a similar point of view. Always call 911 in the guard shack. Story 72. Worked in the basement of a shopping center, midnight shifts in a controlled area, computers 1981, no customers, no public. We had to wear a shirt and tie. Story 73. Cement plant manager made all employees back into their parking spots. In the event there was an emergency, all could depart the lot quickly in their vehicles. Story 74. I work at a large financial institution. We use a customer database to track our notes, emails, calls with clients. A few things drive me crazy. 1. I cannot write an email to a client. I must use a pre-generated template, and I have a small section of about 150 characters to customize it with name, details. 2. We put notes in for calls or meetings with clients, etc. There is a list of words we cannot use in our notes. Otherwise, when the system reviews them weeks, months later, they flag, and when we get told to correct the notes, edit them to remove the flagged words. We do not have access to a list of banned words. However, here are some we have discovered: debt, credit score, collections, new, free, bad, struggle, negative, loan. My job is to have conversations about credit, lending, and money, and I can't use half the words that revolve around those subjects when I put in notes about conversations with clients. They want me to have to conversations, but I have to document them in a specific way, so it isn't considered discrimination if we ever get audited or our notes are needed for a legal case. Story 75. A manager wanted me to copy her on every email. She found out I was sending things without her knowledge. She lost it. She wasn't asking, so she knew what I was doing. She was asking so she could criticize my communication style. Story 76. We're only allowed to wear certain colored shirts. We get an allowance to buy company-branded ones, but we're also allowed to wear our own shirts as long as they're the allowed colors. Our parent company owns over 350 different brands. One time they bought in a bunch of shirts from one of our other brands, and we could buy them at a discount. But the problem was that they weren't our approved colors. So even though we owned the other brand, and the company sold it to us directly, we're not allowed to wear them to work. And they're not something you'd really wear on a normal basis. Story 77. I had a sales job where the manager told us anyone below the team average, 8 of us at the end of each month, would be put on a performance review. I spoke up and tried to explain that even if everyone was 200% to quota, some people would still be below the average, as that is how averages work. I got written up and told not to contradict management in meeting. They put the plan into place, and thankfully a senior level executive got wind of it. That manager had to stop that pretty quick. Story 78. Last place I worked, you literally weren't allowed to talk. Luckily, I worked in the clean room separate from almost everyone else, so they didn't bother us with that. Otherwise, I would have been fired the first day. Story 79. I've encountered the 911 rule numerous times, however, where I've seen it. It was at places where we had security in place and responders can't get on site easily. So in the event of an emergency, they wanted us to call security. They'd call 911 and coordinate getting responders into the site. In such a case, that policy makes sense. At retail and commercial establishments, it doesn't make sense. Call 911, then notify management. Story 80. There was a fire in the arms room. Our commander said not to pull the fire alarm and sent a guy with a bad knee to run to the fire department. Someone in a different company pulled the fire alarm. Our commander later told us that under no circumstances were we to pull the fire alarm. That order was rescinded once he left company command. Story 81. I had a boss that told me I should stay during a fire alarm. I had to meet a vendor downstairs, so left anyway, and came back too after talking to security. I spotted my boss hightailing it out of the building, moving people out of his way. He didn't see me going down. When he got back several minutes after me, I smiled and asked him why he told me to stay when he would have thrown a baby out of the way to get out of his building. He laughed big time and said he was kidding. Let that be a lesson to me, that always tell your boss to go to blazes if it puts your life at risk. No job is worth it. I laughingly told him I would make go to blazes a code phrase that it was a task was a step too far. He laughed again and said, unless it was a go to, was probably sufficient. Wouldn't need to finish the sentence. Story 82. Our work has an anti-idling policy for company vehicles. Makes sense, saves gas, pollution, etc. Guess who has the only electric vehicle and got written up for idling? Story 83. I worked on the railroad for a few years when I was young. Not on trains, but on track. We had this one foreman who would always tell you to bring some back on a stick if you went to take a dump. Guess he wanted to make sure you weren't just screwing off in the weeds. Story 84. Was not allowed to enter any manager's office without wearing a suit jacket. Took in my tightest Alexei Sayle jacket. Not allowed to give it advice to secretaries unless their manager had asked for it. The suit jacket was sadly lost when the era blew up Manchester City Centre in 1996. Story 85. A policy that came out if you took office supplies home, it would be considered theft. I asked him if AI could take home a 500,000 piece of equipment since according to policy it wasn't theft. Disliked that award. Story 86. We couldn't use the word staff. It had to be team. If any management heard that, they would pretty much foam at the mouth. Our full names had to be on our uniforms. I didn't like that all, as one girl had some creeps stalk her on social media. She had an unusual name. Also, no radio. Story 87. We work a variable schedule. They assign us shifts about a week in advance, and we confirm them. The owners insist that schedulers then call us the day before just to confirm your work for tomorrow. If I don't answer, they'll call several times and insist on a callback, even though I already confirmed it when it was assigned. I have tried unsuccessfully to explain why it's wrong to call us on our day off, but they refuse to change. Story 88. Not as dumb as some of these, but I was working my first job as a page at our local library. The job was literally reshelving books that were returned to the library or removed from the shelf. That's it. It was my job to know where every book in the library was. I was reshelving on the second floor on the opposite end of the floor from the single elevator, and an old man with a cane slowly walked over to me and asked me where a specific book would be. I immediately knew it was a few shelves away and lead him directly over to it. He got his book, happily thanked me, and went along his way. Apparently, when he checked out, he sang my praises to the head librarian for helping him locate the book he needed. That was nice of him, correct? Nope. I got reamed out by that librarian because only librarians are capable and qualified to help people locate books. I asked if she seriously expected me to have that elderly man who was walking with a cane go back to the elevator and back downstairs to wait in line to speak with a librarian in order to find a book he was practically standing next to. She told me that was correct. I quit right then. Story 89. We were only allowed to use the parking spots farthest from the entrance, so customers can use the closer ones. I worked as an overnight shelf stalker, so there were no customers. Rules still applied. Story 90. I used to be a letter carrier for USPS. During training, we were told two things very clearly, and we were required to acknowledge both. 1. You must report all accidents, no matter how small, fender benders with the mail truck, etc., immediately. And 2. You understand that if you do have an accident, no matter how small, your USPS employment will be terminated. It was surprising how many scratches and dents the trucks acquired when people's backs were turned. Story 91. About 6 months after we returned to the office, we were told all hourly staff had to do all overtime work in the office while salaried employees could take their laptops home to keep up during our busy season. The rule lasted about 2 weeks, since our supervisor had to try to do all of the work that wasn't getting done, since no one in our department was driving to the office on weekends. Story 92. When sitting around a conference table, we always had to lower our seat so that our female boss could have everyone look up to her to establish dominance. Story 93. I have to wear a stricter uniform, specific button-collared shirt, specific iron pants, specific sock color, specific shoes type and color, with stricter expectations of how I wear my hair, makeup, as in have to wear but make it look natural, and jewelry, no more than 2 standard size earrings that do not hang per ear. While in a non-public facing position that is stuck in a small room staring at a computer and talking on a phone for 12 hours, with no ability to leave said room except for small breaks for bathroom. And to heat food, I will eat at my desk with no lunch break. But I have seen it be acceptable for the public-facing employees to have multicolored hair and gauges in their ears, all for pay that hasn't been paid out on time in months. Story 94. Couldn't wear my watch when working as a laborer on a building site. Apparently, it stopped everyone asking each other the time, and this made the day go quicker. Story 95, sort of warehouse work, and a dumb HR person made a rule that workers couldn't leave their department area for any reason, meaning we were packaging things to ship, but we couldn't cart them to the shipping area. Likewise, the shipping people couldn't come to get the packaged stuff from us. We spent a week packaging orders, but shipping nothing, and the next week a manager comes to ask why customers aren't receiving ordered stuff, where he finds a huge stack of stuff never shipped. We explained the HR lady told us we couldn't send it out with her stupid rule, so we just left it there. Story 96. If you need to call out for emergencies, You need to let the plant manager know 2 weeks in advance, otherwise you get a point. Must add your manager to social media and Discord. If you have a radio, certain songs are not allowed. No songs with cussing, violence towards women. No playing Take This Job and Shove It by Johnny Paycheck or 16 Tons by Tennessee Ernie Ford. All overtime is voluntary, but you can be pointed for refusing it. Attendance is mandatory, even if the sheriff's office calls a code red for road condition. Story 97. Most recent policy I've found is not being allowed to use fire extinguishers for fires, but we have CBLs on how to use them. But don't you dare. And we have had a few fires here and there between machinery or smoke from enough friction to almost cause a fire. Story 98. In a previous life, I worked in the restaurant industry, including a 1-year stint in fast food management. Policy there was if 911 needed called, we weren't to use the company business phone, we had to use our cell. Story 99. Washers are usually stamped out of sheet metal. They have a side with rounded edges and a side with a sharper edge. As a result, worked at a place that required the sharper edge be the bottom side of every bolted joint. The reason was that washers are stronger that way. They are not stronger that way. Nobody thought it was obnoxious, and everybody enforced it. Was weird and illogical. I thought it was an elaborate prank at first. Story 100. Working home construction, OSHA saw us carrying 4x8 sheets plywood upstairs using the wide stairs. No guard, so you can't use the stairs. Had to climb a ladder to bring up sheets of ply. Next day, we were back using the stairs as foreman made the crap railing from marking stakes that had more stakes taped on top for handrail. But it counted. Story 101. Had a new gung-ho warehouse manager who tried to tell us if people show up 1 to 15 minutes late, then they forfeit 15 minutes of pay. That lasted about an hour. The whole crew revolted against him. Story 102. At the track, if there's a fire alarm, I lock my box, turn off my machine, and go away from the building. Most of the tellers ignore it and keep working. Maybe it's from my OSHA days. Story 103. I've had 2 jobs where collaboration was prohibited. One had the excuse that different people were getting paid from different budgets, so collaboration was mixing up budgets. Another had a mentally unfit manager who believes that life is hard and people should struggle alone. Story 104. The list is long. Wearing safety glasses to use a 4-inch vibrating sander on Hard Rock Maple, wearing safety glasses to spray paint in a side draft booth, sweeping a clean floor again, getting fake yelled at in front of the boss's boss for mistakes the boss made, turn signals on forklifts, etc. Story 105. A Chinese teenager from my college went missing and we didn't know anything about it. It turns out she'd been acting flaky and routinely missing sessions, so there were no particular red flags. Her parents flew in from China to look for her without contacting us, or any other authorities. When I found out, I contacted my manager who told me not to contact the police. I literally had her parents sobbing in my office. I called the police. She was found within a few hours because they knew what they were doing. Story 106. This is a few years ago, but all our computers had to be password protected for privacy, which makes perfect sense. But our admins were required to do a CD backup every day of the medical data. The CDs were stored in a desk and were not password protected. When I questioned the security of that, I was told I just didn't understand. Story 107. A coworker was unjustly fired, but got her job in another department back due to a lawsuit. We were told we may not talk to her. I told them, put it in writing. Of course they didn't do that. I kept talking to her every day? Story 108. I worked for a national drugstore chain. We were not allowed to click in 1 minute early or 1 minute late. When I was scheduled to open, there were others also waiting at the time clock, and we all had to clock in at the same minute. It was stupid, unnecessary stress. Story 109. Worked at Giant Tiger years ago and remembered speaking with the owner about store drills in case of a robbery or violent situation. He said we have designated areas to regroup to in case this happens. I flat out said, if there is an active shooter, I'm bailing, regardless of your policies, and I'll getting out of Dodge. He didn't like that too much. Story 110. Former employer had a limit on nightly cost for hotel, but no limit on travel expenses. So instead of booking a crap hotel in the city, I booked a really nice place in a small town outside and traveled by train to the city, first class. Resulting cost was 3 times the amount. But hey, working as designed, Story 111. I encountered the same dumb rule as a passenger on public transportation. I got off the train at my usual station and saw a young man lying on the platform. I ran down to the ticket agent and told her she needed to call 911 for emergency services. She told me that she was aware there was someone on the platform, but that she was not allowed to call 911, that she had to call the train department's central number, and they had to handle arranging for emergency services. Meanwhile, the person who was lying on the platform bled out. Story 112. I worked at a bank as a teller around 2010. Bank had a casual dress code, but our manager demanded a formal code. Only branch to have it, but I needed a job with insurance, so I took it. Dress code was shirt ties, slacks, dress shoes. I bought 6 of the same shirt, 2 ties that weren't identical but were hard to tell apart, 3 pairs of the same black dress pants. I wore clean clothes every day, but it was the same looking outfit. I had a nicer dress clothes wardrobe. I just refused to wear to work. My boss gets on my case about it. I tell HR I'm being harassed. She makes life miserable for me as a result. We start going to HR over everything, but I'm not going to win versus her. I transfer branches and start wearing a varied wardrobe. I crush old manager and sales of credit card machines and business accounts as a senior teller versus her being a branch manager. I get a better gig at a credit union as a personal banker and go scorched earth in the exit survey. I opened a bunch of accounts at the bank I'm leaving before I leave. First day, I head off at the new gig I go into, close all my accounts with the old manager, and absolutely rip her to shreds about how bad she is at sales. And I was better. You know how they say, the best revenge is a life well lived. I said, screw that. I'm gonna be a giant jerk. She had to take it as I was a customer there, to close accounts and not an employee. Laid into this witch in a calm but satisfying manner so her, my old team, could hear it. About 3 years later, I've got a nice tech job and make more than her. She used to talk about what she made and complain. So I went to her branch for my mortgage consultation, made sure she heard my numbers, and then said, I need to shop around, and left so her branch couldn't get credit. You were the worst boss I ever had, Debbie. I know I said it to your face, but I'll never stop saying it. Story 113. One boss told me eating an apple at my desk was unprofessional. He also told me when his bosses came through and was making the rounds, saying hi to everyone that is, was terribly inappropriate for me to talk with her. Story 114. Food service. Produce must be kept at temperature per the health code, but doesn't need to be delivered at temp. They grow outdoors. Your tomatoes are at 45 degrees. They were just delivered. And there isn't a violation. Story 115. No sitting at work. I used to work in a big factory where people had to work in upright position. There were high chairs available for those who needed them. You know, health and safety reasons, not to mention employee rights and workplace ergonomics. I didn't work in that area, but I visited there a few times a month. One day, some random manager from upstairs took a stroll on the factory floor. They were not the floor manager nor in any way dealing with the actual production itself. After their stroll, the chairs were suddenly banished because workers looked lazy, despite the fact we were churning out record production month after month. After a few weeks, someone ratted them to a government agency, and rightfully so. Chairs were returned without a ceremony, and the topic was no longer discussed. Story 116. I could never tell customers that the internet we sold them was basically trash. They were getting horrible speeds for overinflated prices. They constantly all complained of slow speeds all day, every day. But we could never tell them that Story 117, we had a plant room at my last job where you were required to wear a hard hat at all times. The problem I had was that at 6 feet tall, everything was well over my head until I put the hard hat on, which made me taller, and therefore banged the hard hat on everything. When I mentioned it to health and safety, they told me the fact the hat was taking the hits meant it was doing exactly what the rule was there for, and saving my head from injury. Story 118. My friend worked at a retail store that had cameras watching the tills. If the cashier is standing alone, doing nothing for more than 10 seconds, the higher-ups would clip the footage and send it to the store manager so they could reprimand them. Story 119. I retired from a tech career and moved to a small town of about 2,000 people. I was bored, so thought part-time at Time Hortons would be perfect. No stress, I like people. And we're a town with a large amount of seniors. I adore seniors, says the 60-year-old. Because we're on a main highway between Saskatchewan and Alberta, we got a fair amount of road travelers at mealtimes, but the rest of the day could be quite slow. There were days I was looking around, begging for work to pass the time. We had a regular group of seniors who wanted their coffees in china cups, not cardboard, and as full as possible because we didn't do refills. Problem was, most of them had issues carrying them to their tables. If we weren't busy, I'd tell them to sit and I'd bring them their coffees. When they were done, I'd clear off their tables and have a short chat. It was amazing. They were adorable people, and we all enjoyed the conversation. I got in trouble. I was told we're not a full-service restaurant, and I couldn't do that. So I stood like a fool behind the counter while they struggled. Weeks later, there was a mom with 3 small kids who stopped in off of the highway. The kids were all crying. Mom looked exhausted. They ordered lunch. I told her to sit and I'd bring her lunch when it was ready. She thanked me profusely, cried, and just looked so exhausted. I cleared their table when they were done, helped her to the door, and even got a hug. She tipped me $10 and thanked me over and over. I want to again make it clear. They were one of only 2 groups in the store. There was nothing else for me to do. I got in crap again and was reprimanded because we can't accept tips. They have to go in the till. I went on a smoke break with a shift manager later that day and halfway through my smoke said, "Duck this, I don't need this job," and walked home. Story 120. Couldn't talk to other staff. I started a warehousing job and was assigned to clean under the massive shelves and the floor with another staff member. After 30% of the job, I called him over and said, there must be a more efficient way to do this from what we were doing. After 2 minutes of talking, I spot the manager sneakily hiding around the corner with his phone out videoing us not working. I quit soon after. Crap place. Still hiring since then, by the way. Story 121. I never worked there, the rule. They had kind of made me change my mind about that, but during the interview at orientation, they said that if we had to go to the bathroom, we had to flag down a manager, get their permission to go to the bathroom. After hearing that, I decided, nope, not for me. A restaurant I worked at, when you weren't going to eat your lunch, you had to clock out, find a server, have her write a ticket for your lunch pay, then find a manager to sign the bill, and then hope that the kitchen was able to make your lunch in time for you to eat it before your 30 minutes was up. If you weren't able to eat your lunch in that time period, you just did without. Story 122. I work in a medical office, helping patients with their insurance. When I learn that a patient has an insurance change, I have to notify the off-site billing office. If they find out before I do, they don't have to notify me. Story 123. 1 year while working at a big box electronics store, management told us that we had to call it Green Friday, and anyone calling it Black Friday would get a final warning. Story 124. Same safety meeting, safety clown. Bluetooth earbuds are strictly prohibited in the workplace because you can't hear what's going on around you even if you aren't listening to music. Safety clown. Using earplugs, earmuffs is strongly encouraged and are freely provided by the employer to protect your hearing. Seeing the safety clown tell the guy wearing external hearing aids that he couldn't wear them on the job was pretty funny. You're telling me to take out my hearing aids? Yes, you can't wear earbuds. You need to be able to hear what's going on. Okay, I hear you just fine. Go duck yourself. The floor supervisor had to get involved and explain to the safety clown that the guy was wearing hearing aids, not earbuds. He wouldn't take the employee's word for it. Story 125. Used to work for Walmart in the tire and lube garage. Randomly, after completing an oil change and the computer work, the computer would ask for a manager to come in and double check the work. Now, normally I don't mind having a double check. I would have to do it at any normal oil change or tire shop. But Walmart, Walmart. We would have to call for a manager numerous times because we would usually only have one in the store, so they are running around. In a normal shop, an oil change takes 10 to 15 minutes. Because of the computers we use at Walmart sucks, and we had to literally use reference books for oil filter or oil and amount with all the notes the store wanted. It takes minimum 20 minutes. And on waiting for a single manager in the whole store to come and double check our work, it took over an hour after we were done for it to be signed off. Not only that, but they wouldn't even know what they were supposed to be checking or how. We would have to teach them how to double check our work. Story 126. If there is a fire inside a Best Buy, no employee is allowed to use a fire extinguisher, but yet each month, an employee must inspect and sign off on the inspection tag on each fire extinguisher. Story 127. I've had an owner that also told me not to call 911. I worked at a hotel overnight that had some guests that liked their privacy. A man walked in and tried to rob us while pointing a .25 at me. His hand was shaking so bad, I thought he was going to accidentally shoot me. To make a long story short, I got the pistol away from him and told him to get lost. I called the owner, told him what happened at 3 a.m. He first asked if I called 911. When I said no, he said thanks, and he would see me in the morning. Story 128. I had an internship where everyone had to go through a gate using a card to check in. If you checked in early, you had to work until 5 p.m. If you checked in 1 minute too late, you had to work 30 minutes longer. Fair system. Story 129. What is most remarkable is that although we sometimes have bad managers or management, it really seems all these crazy, ridiculous rules come from American places, because here it would only take one trip or phone call to HR, or better yet, the union, and this would all go away. It would simply be impossible to do any of these things here. As it should. Story 130. Worked a job once where the CEO fancied himself to be a Silicon Valley SQL tech bro genius, but thought their success came largely from their office space aesthetic. He spent a ton of money on a new office space that had that converted warehouse vibe that was really popular at the time, and then selected furniture based on how cool he thought it looked. Then he had this specific look he wanted for all the workspaces. Namely, he didn't want any clutter or decorations. We weren't allowed to have drawers or shelves under our desks either. We each had a small cubby at the front of the office where we were supposed to store all of our personal stuff at the end of the day, leaving the desk 100% clean. We all had fixed assigned desks. There was no hot desking, so you had to clear off in case someone else needed the desk the next day. This was 100% about his belief that the aesthetics of the office being a certain way were the keys to success. A few years after I left, he was forced out of the company founded by the board. What's the most absurd rule you had to follow at work? Comment. Story 1. Cans are inappropriate where patients can see them. No soda or energy drinks unless you put them in another container. Meanwhile, the manager sits there with her gigantic dunking coffee every day, and the favorite employees can do what they want without complaints. Deeply stupid workplace full of pointless micromanaging. Story 2. I had a manager who would only allow me to use blue ink pen. One day I used a black ink pen, and she turned around and threw her blue ink pen directly at my head. F that. I walked my ass into the CFO's office and no longer reported to her after that day. All the work I used to do for her, she now had to do for herself. Story 3. When I began my teaching career in the 1970s, students were allowed to smoke cigarettes on campus. Yes, really. But the rule was absolutely no soft drinks allowed on campus due to health concerns over the sugar. Story 4. I had a call center job in college that didn't allow cans of soda at the desks. They worried about spilling. I had a manager that I hated. She was like the soda Nazi. I brought in a clicker that sounded just like you were popping a can of soda. I would wait till it's pretty quiet, then click. She would pop her head up like something out of whack-a-mole. I would wait till she sat down and did it again. She would walk around looking for soda cans on the desks. It drove her insane. I bought a couple of more and gave them to friends, and we would coordinate the clicks or do it in rotation. When she was at one end of the center, there would be a click from the other end. She would all but run to that side, looking for the culprit. She even convinced the center manager to send out a reminder memo. Then team meetings where we had to sign a document stating that we wouldn't have open soda cans at our desks. We waited to lull her into a false sense of security about a week, then started all over. It was glorious. When I left, I walked past her, I clicked in her ear and tossed it on her desk, and then popped a real soda and drank it sitting on her desk and watched her turn purple with rage. It was the most fun I ever had at a job. Story 5. Can't heat up anything with flavor for lunch because the boss doesn't like smells. No ramen noodles or curry chicken or spaghetti with meatballs, just cold sandwiches. Story 6. This happened when I was doing teacher training. Because 2 people were regularly late for work, the whole teaching team were told they had to report to the office, which was about 15 minutes from where some of us worked, every single day. This involved people having to reorganize their lives for school drop-offs for their kids and taking earlier buses, etc. After 2 days of wasting everyone's time, the teachers decided that they would all stop doing that. Management didn't know how to deal with the whole team disobeying an instruction, so nothing was said about it. After that, the admin people had to actually do their job and address the problem with the latecomer. Story 7. I turned down a job once in part because they had a rule, no canned drinks in the office. Glass bottles, only because they were a glass manufacturing company. Didn't help that the hiring manager let on after I had accepted that salaried employees typically worked 45 to 50 hours a week as well. Fortunately, my current employer at that time matched their offer, so I stayed put for 3 more years. Story 8. Fast food. GM was trying to set the narrative that someone stole 50 pounds of frozen chicken, so we had to throw all unused food into a pail and count it at the end of the day for like 2 weeks. Between the people who could have, me and another manager, I didn't have a car at the time, so I took the bus, and my friend lived in a studio apartment with a tiny freezer. It was the single most disgusting thing I had to do. He got fired like 3 weeks into this crap when he was fired. Guess where I found the 50 pounds of chicken? Yep, in the freezer. Story 9. We were asked to come in at 8:45 instead of 9 a.m. so the team could build culture and have a coffee together. When I first got hired, my manager told me the CEO loved doing this, and it was highly encouraged to show up. I was like, are you effing kidding me? Story 10. Sit in your chair at the phone all day, but sit up perfectly straight. If you slump even a little, it shows up in your voice. Don't stand up at your desk when on the phone. It shows up in your voice. Smile when you answer the phone. It shows up in your voice when you're not smiling. Call centers of any kind just suck. Story 11. In the early 90s, I had a boss that hated computers. Instead of typing letters into a computer, he made us type it on a typewriter, which sucked because if he wanted to edit it, you had to retype the whole thing. He said he hated how the letter looks when done on a computer. Such a waste of time. Story 12. Attending. I was an event planner and was expected to work 9 to 5 Monday, Friday. Then you were expected to attend your big events, which happened to be on the weekend. When I complained about needing time to myself, boss suggested coming in at 4 to 5 a.m. I once worked 21 days straight. Awesome place to learn boundaries and learn what I'd never put up with again. Terrible place. Terrible boss who had been a friend. Story 13. My new boss, on her 3rd day of work, asked if I would be comfortable making our office, a single wide trailer, a no bless you zone. She said her last place of employment had had a casual agreement among the employees that for sneezes, the bless you or Gesundheit was always implied, but didn't need to be voiced because it was distracting, and during allergy season, happened about 7 million times a day. I was happy to comply, but it was awkward when we added new personnel and it fell to me, as office manager, default HR to give them the lowdown on sneeze protocol. Story 14. No casual shoes in the office. I rode the bus for an hour and it snowed heavily where I lived. I was written up for wearing trainers. I walked in the office, to my desk, and changed into my office shoes. After that, I had to change my shoes on the street after getting off the bus and carry them to my desk, and they had to be unseen. Story 15. Early when I started working, I pushed carts at grocery store. I had a water bottle with a strap because it was 100 degrees and I needed water. The manager tried to argue that I couldn't have the water on me and I threw an absolute fit about it. Walked out of that job because I'm not going to push carts, get heat stroke, and then walk into the building every time I just needed a sip of water. It was inefficient and stupid, and I refused to do inefficient and stupid rules at the risk of my own health. Story 16. I had a white-collar job where we had to clock in and clock out. It was mandatory that we take at least a 30-minute lunch break. That wasn't the problem. The problem was because our clock-in system sucked so much. You couldn't take any part of your lunch break after 1:30 p.m. The clock-in system was screwed up and wouldn't record a lunch break after 1:30 p.m. So let's say you take your break at 1:15 p.m., you were screwed because it had to be recorded as at least 30 minutes. So in this case, it would show your day as something like this: 8 a.m., clock in 1:15 p.m., clock out, and it would only show that you worked 5 hours and 15 minutes, even though I actually took a lunch break from 1:15 p.m. to 1:45 p.m. and then worked until 5 p.m. Oftentimes, what we had to do was clock in and clock out for our lunch break before 1 p.m. and 1:30 p.m., despite the fact we were still working. So in this case, if I was planning to take a lunch break at 1:15 p.m. because I'm working on something, I'd have to clock myself out by, say, 12:30 p.m. while I'm working, then clock myself back in at 1 p.m. while I'm still working, and then take my lunch break at 1:15 p.m. Management knew this was a problem, and not only did nothing about it, but they would really grill you about your time, because if you're out of the office from 1:15 p.m. to 1:45 p.m., but you showed that you clocked in and out from 12:30 p.m. to 1 p.m. They wanted to know why that was. I just wanted to Sam Kinison yell, "Fix your ducking clock system, assholes!" Story 17. You absolutely could not take any employer-owned property home. They enacted a work-from-home policy for COVID. You had to work at home for the weekdays. How? But you were also required to work in office on weekends, a full 7 days, and could not wear a mask in the office because it looked unprofessional, and weekends are safe from COVID. Genius managers. It was a pretty small office with artificial departments, so there were lots of managers. Attempts to contact us outside work email, which we did not use outside the office because it was company-owned. This was reverted when we all quit working entirely, as it was all employment contract violation. That plan did not last long. Story 18. I remember one place I worked at, very small office. We were not allowed to have microwave popcorn because the manager was on a diet. Like, WTF? That's a you problem, not a me problem. I bought a Costco-sized box of Orville Redenbacher and shared a bag with my office mate for the next month. Manager was fired about 6 months later. She hated me, but the company owner loved me. Story 19. I had to park in the company parking lot, not on the public street. They also wanted you to sign a letter allowing them search your car whenever they wanted. Story 20. It's honestly the return to office mandate, and that we have to come into the office at least twice a week. At one point, we had everyone in the office except one member of staff who was working from home. So we held our team meeting on Teams. We were all sat in the same room with our headsets on, talking virtually to each other. The fact that we come to the office and have virtual chats with our physically present colleagues is not only absurd, it is moronic. Story 21. A few years back, thousands of large report files must be kept in shared Team Outlook inbox instead of being moved to a network drive. So we know where they all are. Also, manager didn't understand the difference. Outlook wasn't designed to do that, so it would take minutes for each to open, which got old fast, for no business or security purpose. Story 22. Worked at a location where people were required to proofread their work while moving their lips, silent reading out loud. If you didn't proofread this way, you were fired on the spot. Story 23. Overtime has to be vetted in advance and cannot fall before the workday. Being the company IT person, and we have 15 offices throughout the country, I usually attempt to plan upgrades or work by our ISP or vendors before the workday. Needless to say, that rule went out the window soon when I had our ISP upgrade our copper line to fiber and pulled our internet from 9 to 11. Story 24. I had a boss that when you asked for any PTO for a doctor's appointment, you can only take it in 4-hour increments. So let's say I only need an hour off to get to an appointment. I would have to take 4 hours of PTO. And then if you ran out of PTO, he would no longer let you leave early for appointment. Story 25. Also, according to the dress code, leggings were considered stockings and were banned. and you could only wear shorts if it was over 45 degrees Celsius. Short skirts, shorter than the shorts, were okay though. Story 26. I just quit my job because I'm getting over the after effects of COVID and was yelled at for going to the bathroom to blow my nose and threatened. Story 27. A friend of mine worked for a major beverage company. Employees weren't allowed to drink the competition's products at work, which was understandable, but they also weren't allowed to have them in their home. Story 28. I had to check in with my boss face to face when I arrived and left every day. Also, any appointments or time off needed outside my assigned lunch hour had to have PTO used. No shifting your lunch hour or work schedule to cover for them. Story 29. I had a job once where they told me where to live, what to wear, how long my hair could be, and how much I could weigh. They made me call my bosses ma'am and sir. They made me wake up in the mornings and run and do push-ups and often made me shoot a rifle at targets. It was crazy. Story 30. No water at the register while cashiering, even if it's out of sight. Thanks to a regional manager. Supervisors will step on for you if you need to drink at the water fountain. Well, after feeling thirsty for an hour, I asked to have a supervisor cover me. I was told no because we were too busy. I was livid and almost left for the day. I composed myself and proceeded to ignore the rule from that day forward. Story 31. In a very liberal Northeast city at a very liberal college, my boss would make us observe a period of silence on Good Friday. She would actually glare and then later yell at us after the silent period ended for speaking. So no phones got answered, and any employees from another department that stopped by for a work-related issue, we would have to get up, walk far away to have that conversation. That was only one of many extremely problematic management issues that she had. Story 32. At my job, you have to use a Clorox wipe on the toilet seat after you use it, and then put the seat up. We also spray down and wipe the table where we sat for lunch before going back to work. So really not the worst thing, as the bathrooms are always clean. I've just never had to do that anywhere else. Story 33. Some of these rules should be made illegal. How dare anyone make rules about one's personal facial hair choices or bodily function? Reading these posts solidifies my claim that the American workplace is fascistic. There is no democracy if persons have the right to make arbitrary rules. Down with the petty tyrant. Story 34. I thought it was crazy at first, but when I worked for a managed service provider, MSP its support for other companies, I had to email the office when I arrived at a client's location, then once again when I left. We also had to wear button-down shirts, slacks, and ties. I was on site doing a workstation install one day. This was a sheet metal duct manufacturer. The workstation was one that ran a forming machine, and they put it under the drive chain. It was covered in dirt and grease. I took off my shirt and tie to remove the old workstation, and a boss showed up and got on me for not being properly dressed. Story 35. Not me, but a friend. They have an app that tracks their movements, whether they're at their desk, break room, smoking area, whatever. They also called her in once because she was staring at the screen for 40 minutes straight. She was reading an article that they sent to her to edit. Story 36. Was hired as a national marketing manager at a family-run school textbook company. They realized only after I started that they absolutely did not have the budget for my role. So the owners, a couple, decided to do everything they could to make me quit, so they didn't have to pay me out. Charming. This meant that they'd collude over dinner at home and turn up each morning with new workplace rules for just me to follow. First week, it was no mobile phones switched on in the office. Mine was a mobile phone-based role. Then progressive memos each day that lead to mobile phones allowed, but no phone batteries were to be attached. So, leave it in my bag? No batteries in the office at all. Everyone else could leave it in their car, but I took the train to work. So, I left it in a plastic bag behind a pot plant in the reception of a neighboring business. I stuck it out a month. By then, I was relegated to cleaning out the supply closet in the dark with a bucket of soapy water. I turned up that day with bright floral rubber gloves and a housework apron, humming and smiling. It broke them. They finally handed me an envelope and told me to get out. I went straight to a bathroom cubicle and locked myself in to check there was actually the right money in the envelope. Thankfully, there was. They were enraged, banging on the door and screaming expletives. I went around calmly and said goodbye to all my super traumatized colleagues, with these two owners threatening police, spitting and snarling behind me. Fun times. Ended up having Friday night drinks with the staff for the next few weeks, mainly to stick it to the bosses. But then, most of the staff quit, funnily enough, just before school went back, their busiest month. Story 37. Office for a small software company had an electronic lock on it, and we weren't able to access the office after a certain time without contacting the manager. Turns out he didn't like SF rents, and so he started living in the office. We thought the Murphy bed in the conference room and locked closet was odd until he got fired and came clean. The weirdness of SF.com days. Story 38. I had to wear a white or powder blue long sleeve, even in summer with no air conditioning, button-down shirt that was ironed black or gray slacks, black dress socks, black or brown shoes, and a tie. The dress code just said a tie, so I deliberately cultivated a collection of absolutely hideous ties so the boss would shudder every time he saw me. I wrote software and answered phones in a private office with walls. No client ever saw me, even when they were in the building for training, which was only every few months. The office manager would look me over every morning, often being the only person in the company who'd see me all day. If I wasn't dressed appropriately, or if my shirt had wrinkles, I'd be sent home to change and my pay would be docked. I had another job where I had to dress similarly, but was allowed to wear a short-sleeve shirt. They had air conditioning, and they didn't care about my socks or what color anything was, as long as it wasn't print or plaid. Story 39. I took a retail job at a big box hardware retailer to help make ends meet while unemployed in my field. I was not allowed to sit while running the checkout line because it gives customers the impression that you're lazy. I told my boss that I've had 3 back surgeries and that standing for 4 to 8 hours in a row was extremely painful. I even brought a note from my surgeon. When the regional manager was in the store, I met with both them to tell them that I could not physically stand for an entire shift, that I needed a stool or chair if I was going to be on register all day. They said, "We'll see what we can do." I went in for my shift on the Saturday of Memorial Day weekend, saw that I was on register, and asked for a stool. When they said that letting me sit would be unfair to the other cashiers and give the customers a bad impression, I said, "Okay, thanks," and clocked out and went home and never went back. Story 40. I was discharged and sent home within an hour of arriving on the first day of a new job. I wore a business suit with slacks and was told it was company policy women could only wear dresses. Pants were for men only. The manager told me the owner saw me walk in and told the manager to send me home immediately. Early 80s. We've come a long ways, baby. Story 41. No facial hair. No other reason than the boss was a Karen and couldn't grow a mustache to save his life. Oh, and if you were his friend, you were exempt. Told him where he could shove that rule. Story 42. I work in a restaurant and we're not allowed to talk to each other about anything non-work related. I can ask my coworkers to run food for me or help make drinks for my tables, but we cannot talk about what we ate for dinner last night, how our kids are doing in school, etc. Even when there's nothing to do. It's so ridiculous. We're all grown people, and they treat us like toddlers. Story 43. I worked at a job where they made a schedule for all employees help clean the break room, whether you ate in there or used the break room. The veteran employees never followed the schedule. Story 44. Worked in a 24-hour helpline for healthcare for extra money after retirement. Those of us on the midday shift, 11 a.m. to 8 p.m., liked to dim the lights. Managers went nuts and demanded we keep those damn bright lights on at all times, and it became a real fight. They weren't even there. Those lights were so bad for our eyes, but they won by putting a lockbox around the light switch. So petty. Story 45. In my current job, you must stay until the end of your scheduled shift regardless of workload. For example, if I'm scheduled until 2:30, but my work is finished at 1:45, I have to just sit there until 2:30. Yes, I'm getting paid to do nothing, but I'd rather just go home. Story 46. A company I interviewed for had a bell, like a school bell, that would ring in the morning, letting people know that they had to be at their desks. I didn't get offered the job anyway. This was in the late 90s. They just recently went out of business. Not sure if the bell was still in use. Story 47. I worked at a place where it was no food or drink at our desks too. No radios, no personal phone calls, 30-minute lunches, and you had to clock out before leaving your area. It was a 10-minute walk to the parking lot, so essentially no leaving for lunch. Story 48. We could only drink tap water from organization-provided water bottles. No other drinks allowed in the office. You got your bottle upon hire. It was nice, from Land's End with the company logo, but nothing special. The tap water requirement was the CEO's because she hated anyone drinking anything other. For board meetings, bottled water, canned soda, coffee, and tea were provided. Story 49. Worked in a large Canadian chain bookstore where we had probably at least 30 employees altogether. The store always had 4 managers on the go, and somehow they always had 2 that were great and 2 that barely finished high school and for some reason thought that the title made them special. At this point, one happened to be the GM at the time, and if we called in sick, tried to make a policy where we had to bring in a sick note from a doctor, even if it was for 1 day. Lasted maybe a week until one of the older employees told her that she'd be hearing from the labor board. Policy disappeared almost as fast as it appeared. Story 50. Not an unnormal one, but having to dress up even though we weren't customer-facing. Like, why did we decide as a society that you are suddenly unproductive in jeans? Also during forcing people to go back into the office that for 10 to 15 plus years they were full-time remote. Story 51. A few months ago, I was on a conference call with multiple departments. After having it been drilled in our heads that we are an on-camera culture for conferences, I turned on my camera. My boss pinged me during the meeting to tell me that I was on camera. I said, "Yes, I know." She said, "Well, being on camera for this particular meeting is only for leaders. I had no idea. I was embarrassed and never told. It was then that I realized my boss is a typical mean girl. Story 52. I had a temp job for about 3 months in an HR department about 25 years ago. The director of the department insisted that I be the one to always check the fax machine and got angry if she found a fax in the machine that I hadn't picked up. The room with the fax machine was nowhere near my desk, so I had to get up and check the fax machine every 15 minutes. Even so, if a fax arrived right after I'd checked the machine, I would get reprimanded. The person whose position I was temping for was on medical leave because she had had a heart attack. She was preparing to come back to work and came in one day and I got to meet her. She was a very nice but very stressed out person. The next day I learned that she had died the night before from another heart attack. I can't help but feel that the director, who was very picky about so many things, was responsible for her death. Story 53. I worked in a courthouse for a while as a clerk. We were forbidden from talking amongst ourselves. Our boss, who worked in another city, used to remotely monitor us via cameras placed throughout the office. It was absolutely ridiculous. I also got in trouble for smoking in my car during my lunch break. I guess he saw that from the camera he had on the parking lot. Story 54. I used to work at the senior living home years ago. The director of nursing, who was not my boss, told me I had to park near a church and if there was no parking. Flat out told me, I don't care if it's a long walk. If you park on campus, I will tow your car. Story 55. The main office didn't allow microwave popcorn. Employees couldn't even pop it on another floor and bring it to that floor. The CEO said that the smell was distracting. Story 56. Customer-facing job. Manager said I wasn't allowed to use the words can't, unless, otherwise, and you, must, or else when speaking with the customer about deadline. Internally, not allowed to say the word Trump. Was explaining business logic and said X trumps Y and was scolded. Story 57. When I was pregnant with my now 4-year-old, there was this rule where we weren't allowed to eat on the clock and can only do so before or after our shift. I needed to eat every 2 to 3 hours throughout the day or my morning sickness would worsen and I couldn't function. Manager was like, oh, well, corporate said so. I walked out. I later learned from another server that the same manager wasn't allowing people to take breaks for double shifts, and half the staff walked out later that week as a result. Story 58. We're issued a uniform, a suit, shirt, and tie. We can also request a V-neck sweater. If the sweater is a sleeveless one, we don't need to wear our suit jacket over it. If it has sleeves, we must wear the jacket. Story 59. Coming into the office on rotation to check the chore board. 1. Vacuum the carpets. 2. Take out the trash. 3. Clean the bathrooms. I worked on the road and there was a full office staff. Story 60. I wasn't allowed a beard and had to be clean shaven. They also wanted me to cut my hair down to my shoulders, but I said, nah, I'm not doing that. It wasn't a customer-facing position, and I didn't do any work requiring N95 or any kind of respirator. Story 61. No headphones allowed. They did before I'd started working there. Was told they were disallowed because too many mistakes were being made with them on. You can only use the Comapne's bottle at your station, no other cans or bottles. Story 62. Long story short, 12 teams shared common refrigerators. Was supervisor of a team. Teams rotated cleaning refrigerators each month. Seasonal workload. Was team of 1, me, when my team's month came up. Never used the refrigerator, so I declined. Was blackballed. Still laughing today. Story 63. We were assigned a duty along with our other responsibilities. We did not get to pick it, and nobody trained you. You had to go out, find another person in that role, on another team and learn from them. Only they wouldn't actually tell you that's what you were supposed to do. It was their way of seeing how good you could network, how many friends you had or could make, etc. You were looked at like some kind of loser psycho if you couldn't catch on right away. Story 64. I managed a little boutique gift store once. It was part of a chain. I had to clock in exactly at the start of my shift. If I clocked in a minute early, I'd get a phone call asking why. If I clocked in a minute late, I'd get a phone call asking why. Story 65. You can use the underground parking lot only if you have a company car, even though there are hundreds of free parking places. So employees with no company cars are forced to park on the streets where they have to pay a very high fee. Story 66. I worked for an insurance corporation that had a very strict rule for almost 40 years that every employee, whether in the office or otherwise, whether customer-facing or not, could only wear button-down white shirts. When they finally amended this rule to allow blue button-down shirts, no one participated because everyone already had invested in a closet full of white shirts. Story 67. Worked at a fast food restaurant. Couldn't keep any personal drinks, no water bottles, no cups, nothing. Not even if it was kept in the break room. Instead, they wanted us to get a new paper cup every single time we wanted a drink and then throw it out immediately. Now it was a decently busy place. There might be 15 people or more working at one time. And it gets really hot outside. 100 degrees Fahrenheit in the summer isn't unusual. That meant there was over 100 cups of being used each day. What a waste. Story 68. I worked at the local automobile club, AAA. The old man that ran it, 90 years old, swore he didn't have to pay minimum wage because it was a non-profit organization. The pay was crap and we only got paid once a month. Part-timers weren't allowed to park in the employee parking lot even though there was plenty of room. One year, we all got a 5-pound wheel of cheddar cheese for our Christmas bonus. Everyone kept theirs in the employee lounge refrigerator. Fights broke out over whose was whose, basically because people were starving. Story 69. Not me, but my current manager. She told me years ago under different management, they weren't allowed to have more than 5 personal items on their desk at a time and nothing on the walls. He would do a walkthrough daily and write people up for that. She got written up once for a can of mints on her desk. Story 70. I was asked to do an HR consulting job for a healthcare office that wouldn't allow employees to talk about their weekends, etc., so they couldn't have small talk. Mind you, this office only did insurance billing, so they did not have any patients or public in the office at all. I asked why it was so quiet, and the manager told me the director didn't allow any conversations not related to work. I was brought in to help them understand why morale was so low. Guess what I had in my final report? Story 71. I keep my head bald. I work in the breakfast food industry, and I have to wear a hairnet. I could understand a beard net as I have a goatee, but I'm not asked to weave one of those. Story 72. Lunchroom had circular tables with 6 chairs that were blue, green, and yellow. When leaving the table, the chairs had to be blue, green, yellow, blue, green, yellow. No extra or fewer chairs, no same colors next to each other. Had to fit the owner's aesthetic. Story 73. No lunch away from your desk. We don't make you work an extra 30 minutes so you can leave early, but you have to eat lunch at your desk. Quit pretty quickly. Story 74. We can't have sharp box cutters with actual razor blades in a warehouse. Only cheap plastic ones that do not cut anything and break if you try to open a box with them. Apparently adults can't be trusted not to stab each other or something. Story 75. Forced to use the bathroom in another wing of the building, even though there was one right next door to our work area. All because an administrative assistant on a power trip thought it was more appropriate. Had to get union involvement and a note from my primary caregiver, so my incontinent self didn't have to hike across half the building to pee. 20 years later, and I'd still run over that Karen with my truck if given the chance. Story 76. Was working at a factory assembly line job. We all had these buckets in our booth to sit on when the line slowed down. This one dude got caught stirring on his ass instead of working. So the line boss came around and took everybody's bucket and said, "If you get caught sitting down, you're fired." We worked 10 to 12-hour days. Seriously pissed me off. Story 77. Working in a retail store. Women's clothing. We had to get dressed up. It made no sense. So every once in a while, we could wear jeans. And I don't mean weekly. We couldn't wear what we were selling. So yeah, it was dumb as hell. If all the employees are walking around wearing the clothes, other people will be like, "Yes, that looks great. I'll buy that." But no, we had to be dressed up like we worked in some kind of fancy office. Story 78. You have to sign into the high-value storage area. Nothing is stored there yet. We're still building the place. And I'm installing both the security cameras and the goddamn door locks, powered hinges, and emergency door release button. It's an empty room so far. Maybe next year there will be high-value stuff in there by the client standards, but right now I keep my tool cart in there while I go to lunch. Story 79. My company used to have rules where women had to wear dresses or skirts and men couldn't have facial hair. Both rules were gone by the time I started in 1993, but I don't think it had been that long. Story 80. Worked in a place where promotion was never merit-based. It was decided by who wrote, copied ChatGPT's the best application, regardless of their incompetence, doing the actual job. Story 81. Required to take a lunch, normally I'd just skip it and leave early, but you were required to punch out for it and punch back in, even as a salaried person. Story 82. I worked in call centers in Manila about 12 years ago, and mobile phones not allowed at all. Then I worked in Sydney, and we had to give 3 fun facts about ourselves to different people who visit us in the training room every day for like 2 weeks. So stupid. Story 83. At my retail job, women were not allowed to clear out the box compactor. If it was jammed, one of the men had to do it, never a woman. My manager just said, "It's too dangerous for a woman. It's dark, and they could slip." Yeah, our compactor was huge, and in order to clear it, one had to climb in and walk to the end with a stick. Story 84. Even if we used it, the letters did feel the same as when printed on the computer. The guy was an idiot. He was his late 60s then. Didn't want to embrace new tech. Story 85. Don't crumple up paper before throwing it away. I worked for a print shop that had 9 locations. This particular rule was set by a manager in one of the locations where I didn't work. Thank goodness. Apparently the manager didn't like the noise, yet he worked in a print shop with a printing press and bindery equipment running. Story 86. When the bookkeeper changed her hours from 9 to 5 to 8 to 4 and then started forcing me to show up at 8:35 since she didn't want to be in the office alone. Funny part is that she wouldn't even show up until 8:50 but still get paid for the full time since no one else knew but me, and I didn't want to say anything since I was so young. So I'd just sit there in the parking lot for like 20 to 25 minutes stewing in my anger. Story 87. I worked in a hospital and had to call my manager, Mr., his last name. No one could call him by his first name. We were in administration, and he was only 10 years older than me. It was weird. Story 88. Summaries of every meeting ever. Even if nothing was discussed, because we literally have far too many anyway. But the summaries are required since certain coworkers can never remember things discussed in the meeting. I don't understand why remote equals constant meetings that did not require meetings, and a simple email would have sufficed. I can't stand it. Story 89. I was told one time I couldn't bring lunch to work. I never followed that one. Another time I was told the soup was too cold. Then I was told it was too hot. So I asked what would you like the temperature to be, and he looked at me like a smartass and walked away. Story 90. During COVID, we were meant to clean our desks at least 4 times a day. Nobody did it as we all sat at the same desks every day and didn't share them with anyone else. Story 91. A bank I worked for allowed us to have drinks at our desk, but they had to be in an unmarked cup. Anything with a logo or advertising was forbidden because someone up the food chain thought it would give customers the impression we were promoting that company. I failed to see the connection between McDonald's and our bank. Story 92. Come to work 15 minutes early. If you start at 12 p.m., you have to be in by 11:45 a.m. This was unpaid time, and if you came in after 11:45 a.m., but before 12 p.m., you'd still be written up for lateness. Story 93. Not allowed to use the customer's bathroom. I was a traveling electrician, and due to some asshole that royally blew up a customer's bathroom once in the past, nobody was technically allowed to use the customer's bathroom, even though just about every customer would say, if you need to use the restroom, it's over here. I broke the rule all the time because I'm not a savage, but having to leave the job site, delay progress, and make my day take longer just to use the bathroom is ridiculous. Office people don't care that you're 5 hours away in another state working 75 hours a week. Anyway, I would not do well with a micromanager in an office-type job because literally I could probably make that person cry if they had to be my apprentice in a blue-collar setting. Story 94. At my work right now, we do work for the county and get prevailing wage, which is $70 an hour. If we just work anywhere else in the city, you get paid or regular pay. Now, my work has come up with a rule. If you work prevailing wage and we have overtime on the weekend, we cannot get overtime. So this week I work 3 days regular pay and 2 days prevailing wage, and they want me to work today, and I did it, but there were some people who worked prevailing wage every day this week and went to work today for regular pay. I think that's highly illegal. I got to look up the rules in the state. I'm in. Story 95. I was asked to wear a mask while on video calls because the other team members might have to, depending on where they were call in from. I work from home and live 650 miles from my nearest office. Story 96. I worked somewhere that if we took a business trip within the state, you were not allowed to expense meals because you could have brought a lunch, so that's on you if you choose to go out. Story 97. Companies love inventing fake rules to look professional while ignoring stuff that actually matters, like fair pay or sane hours best move, is clock the nonsense early and start planning your exit because dumb rules never live alone. They always come in packs. Story 98. No water in the department. No unauthorized pens. They don't give you pens. No unauthorized gloves. They don't provide any. And the ones they do have, if you insist, are crap. No going through the warehouse, even though we need to take our bins through it to get to the skip. I could go on story 99. At one point, us 2 secretaries were told by office manager, whose only job pretty much was reading the paper, that we were to tell her when we were going to the bathroom. We absolutely did not, in essence, daring her to do something about it. It was immediately dropped. Story 100. We had to go into a special screen and log in exactly what we did each day. Never mind that you could easily log our work by reading our daily reports that we typed each day. I would simply copy and paste large chunks of my daily reports onto that screen. Story 101. I had to clock out at UPS to use the bathroom. I was part of employee meetings and the site director was incredulous when employees asked to get paid. Story 102. Every IT job where I was expected to wear dress slacks and dress shoes and so on, and yet still heft dusty printers around and crawl under desks. Former military, where you learn how to toe the line with uniforms to make things look neat. Sneaky crease stitches, double-sided tape, tiny safety pins, double stitching buttons, non-reg bootstraps, stitching sleeves on 1 to 2 uniforms, permanently folded up for summer, some ridiculous shoe shine tricks I don't remember anymore, etc. I got away with a lot of corduroy pants with a wider leg that fit sort of like jeans. Always made my manager squint a little, and durable, dressy-ish boots with minimal heels and button-ups over a long tank top or t-shirt because the overshirt would ride up while I was doing my damn job. Basically as close to looking like a nerdy dude as possible, but with slightly better fabric and fit. The dudes, of course, got away with just about anything, including sneakers. Had one manager gal repeatedly attempt to offer fashion advice, and I'd just blink and ask if I wasn't fitting the dress code every time. Story 103, worked full-time while going to college. Ran late one day and didn't get my lunch. Told my boss I was punching out 30 minutes early because of it. She had a cow and said I had to take a lunch. So I asked her, "You want me to punch out, sit for 30 minutes, punch in and wait a minute, and punch out and go home?" She said, "You whoop." I said, "Not doing it, and you can write me up if you want." She didn't have the balls to write me up, but could pull her little power trip. Homie, don't play that way. Story 104. The high school I taught had installed metal detectors for the students. The principal decided that the teachers would also use them. It violated our contract. Over 100 teachers were standing outside at the beginning of the school day until central administration overrode her decision. It was a fun morning of chaos. Story 105. Friend was a male nurse. They had tiny lockers, but he got yelled at for putting in code in there because they were only for purses. So he went home, got an old purse, shoved his coat in the purse, and then stuffed the purse in the locker. Story 106. I once worked at a mortgage loan office answering phones. They had a policy that if the client called, they were only allowed to speak with their loan officer, and no one else working on the loan was supposed to talk to the client. Well, if a loan officer was out sick or on vacation, they would leave voicemail messages saying to talk to someone else. However, if a client identified themselves as a client, the people answering the phones were only allowed to send them to their loan officer, and we weren't allowed to tell them that. So imagine closing on a house and you need something urgently from the loan company. But no matter what CSA you got, they kept sending you to a line that no one was answering because the person had taken a sick day, the yelling and screaming over the phone, but it wasn't our fault. It was policy. Story 107. When desktop computers were relatively new and very expensive, we had 2 Mac desktops to share between 5 designers, so we rotated time on them to get our work done. The company as a whole had a rule that everyone had to go to lunch from 12 to 1. That meant that those machines were sitting idle for an hour in the middle of every workday. But still, we could not get an exception to split our lunch time so that the machine time could be optimized. Same company had a rule that you could only take your vacation as full weeks. I once asked to split a vacation because I needed 2 days for something I could not reschedule. But it was a busy time, so it would have been to the company's advantage to have me in the office for the rest of that week. But no dice. I had to take the full week to get the 2 days, so I did. They shot themselves in the foot by leaving the office short-staffed over this petty bit of bureaucracy. Story 108. I worked full-time at a gas station for a summer to save up money for university. There was no pay-at-pump option. The manager insisted I pick a specific product to upsell at each transaction. For example, would you like a Kit Kat today? Or would you like a Coke today? It wasn't enough to just ask if they'd like anything else. Customers looked at me like I was bonkers, or asked, "Why are they on special offer or something?" Of course I had to say no, and I could just tell they were thinking, "Why TF are you asking that?" I complained to the manager, who decided to show me how it's done. All 3 customers she served acted as above, and she upsold nothing. I refused to do this again for the rest of my time working there. Story 109. I worked at a secure government application processing type place. We handled people's personal documents. Could not wear tall boots, like Uggs, because a check could be concealed in them. Could not wear anything with a hood for the same reason. Also, all water has to be in a clear container. Still not sure why. No phones on the floor, nothing with Bluetooth capabilities or any headphones with microphones. And Story 110. I worked somewhere that you were allowed to have the bread and soup for free. It was a restaurant. But you weren't allowed to take breaks to eat, or eat in the bathroom, or eat during your shift. Honestly, I think they did it that way to make it easier to discriminate against people. In the 6 years I worked there seasonally, I saw 2 not white girls with the same job as me get fired during their shift. They did nothing wrong. One was fired for having bread in the hostess stand, though she was being discreet like I was. Story 111. Worked in sales for a tech company. When traveling to visit customers or prospective customers, we were not allowed to be reimbursed for expense on meals unless the meal was to entertain a customer or prospect or for a billable project. Never mind the hassle of business travel or that eating at almost every restaurant is more expensive than eating at home, but you would pay for your own food at home anyway, was the rationale. So when not traveling, we'd make up for it by taking each other out to restaurants and filing expense reports that mentioned entertaining fake prospect names. Management was so stupid that they never caught anyone. Story 112. I worked at a place, state prison, that required us to put our food items in a clear container. You couldn't bring a can of food in to eat because it could be used to smuggle contraband. However, if you put the can in a clear container, it was allowed. Story 113. I worked as a receptionist in an insurance office years ago. We weren't allowed to have anything personal on our desks. No family photos, no plants, no little toys or figurines, nothing. Meanwhile, the boss was sitting in his office with a bunch of family photos, usually taken at some exotic vacation spot, and those stupid executive toys like a miniature pool table and the Sand Zen garden. He also had a brass plaque that said, "Head Mother Ducker in charge." Story 114. We worked outside and we weren't allowed to put our hands in our pockets when it got cold. Also, our trousers had cargo pockets and we can never put anything in it. Story 115. I work for a small city. The area where I work has 2 doors. One that leads to the door to exit lobby of the building. The other is in the back of our area and is next to the kitchen. We are not allowed to keep that particular door closed, with no real explanation why. So we get to smell all the stinky food people heat up and also hear the loud cackling from certain ladies first thing in the morning. Drives me crazy. Story 116. We weren't allowed to smile and act happily while eating lunch at the canteen. I was told that other people think I'm having fun at work, and it was a bad thing in my management's opinion, and bad influence in general. Story 117. I have never understood the drinking thing. I left retail pharmacy over this. They expected me to work 12 hours, diagnosed with lupus, and not have anything to drink all day except on my lunch. No water or anything because it didn't look professional. However, the pharmacists were over there, drinking a R44 drink from Sonic. At lunch, they would go and get refills for each other and drink them in front of us, while our tongues were stuck to the roof of our mouths. We had to do all the talking during the day and interact with the customers. I promised the customers didn't give a damn if there was a bottle of water under the counter or a Pepsi, and you took a drink between customers. It is so insane. I just don't get it. What world is the management coming from? Story 118. I worked at a T-Mobile for an authorized retailer company. We were not allowed to sit down. This was an absolutely unacceptable action. They'd even take pictures of you and share them market-wide and say this is unacceptable. However, most other things under the sun, they didn't care about. I would purposefully play video games and watch TV shows on my phone half the time at work. It was a slow location, in full view of the cameras, and not once did they say anything. But as soon as I sat down, it was an issue. A little before I left, I even started doing crazy karate moves in front of the camera and plugging my music up to the speakers and jamming out while there were no customers. Never heard anything from the company about doing that. Story 119. There's a chain of tire stores in the western US called Les Schwab. They're famous for their customer service. They have a rule saying absolutely no long hair for men. It can't touch your collar. No facial hair. My brother-in-law interviewed for a job there. They told him about the hair policy, and he said he had absolutely no problem with it. They called him back for a second interview. When he showed up, the interviewer said something like, "You know we don't allow long hair or facial hair, right?" My brother-in-law said he did. The interviewer said, "But I see your hair touches your collar, and you've got a mustache?" Brother-in-law says, "Well, yes, I do. But if I'm offered a job, I'll immediately cut my hair and shave off my mustache. I'll always be in compliance with your policies." The interviewer informed him that showing up for the second interview in violation of company policy known to him showed insufficient respect for the company and that he wouldn't be extended an offer. Story 120. Ages ago, my husband's boss at the time had a rule that no more than 7 items were allowed on your desk at the end of the day. The boss would do spot checks and write up any violators. Even when my husband was working at a satellite office 50 miles away, the boss showed up once for a desk check. Story 121. Did you know that there is only one correct way to put paper clips on papers? Turns out, according to a former coworker of mine named Bill, real name because screw you, Bill, wherever you are now, who wanted to be more powerful than the owner, there is. Paper clips have those 2 loops on one end, with the interior loop being smaller than the other. Well, according to Poophead Bill, the small interior loop has to be on the top of the paper with the end of the wire on the right side, and the clip must be 1.5 inches from the upper left-hand corner of the paper. Anything other than that apparently brings upon an office apocalypse that removes all paper clips from all papers inside the office. Thankfully, the file clerks/flunkies can stop whatever they are doing to gather all the loose papers from the floor where Bill the Wonder Demon haphazardly threw them and put them all back together while he watches to make sure we learned our lesson. Paper clips also had to be the larger ones with textured surfaces. Little clips and any with smooth surfaces would also unleash the Bill Raken. The owner had long before decided that it wasn't worth the trouble to talk to Bill about his behaviors, even though Bill was always cited as the reason for sudden and immediate resignations. Screw you, Bill. I hope you get covered in paper cuts just before eating potato chips straight from the bag. Story 122. There are a few. 3 of them deal with company vehicles. 1. All drivers must, and passengers must take a breathalyzer test before driving. As someone who never has and never will drive drunk, I find this ridiculous. But the passengers needing to take one as well is over the top. 2. If you get in an accident, we will assign a number of points based on how at fault we believe you to be. Could be different from the official police determination. At the end of the year, we will deduct money from your bonus base, no points accrued. This ended up being the straw that broke the camel's back for me. I refused to sign the updated agreement, as I do not agree to have money deducted. 3. It is a 3-kilometer walk from the train station to my work site. Since I had a vehicle assigned to me and nowhere on the site to park it overnight, I requested to drive the vehicle to and from work. I was informed that since I lived too close to work, 7 kilometers, that in order to be fair to those that live further away, the answer was no. The kicker was that they were going to pay over $500 per month for coin parking outside of the work site when I could park at my house for free. The latest rule change deals with per diem on business trips. They consider leaving your home and family to work long-term, 1 to 3 years, in a different city a business trip. They used to pay $50 per day, including weekends, which was fair if you didn't mind being away from home. From last month, they lowered it to $15 per day and only Monday, Friday, even though you are still away from home on the weekend. The kicker is there are punishments for refusing to do it. Story 123. We were not to talk amongst coworkers about anything related to work. Everything, and I mean everything, had to go directly to the manager and she would deal with it. Oh, and no giving compliments because it might hurt the feelings of the people not getting the compliment. This was in a commissary kitchen this year. The work was entirely a team effort with team lifts and having to divide up tasks. Morale plummeted and it made the day awkward and everyone super anxious. I quit shortly after this was implemented and then enforced. I've never seen anything so ridiculous in a workplace. Story 124. Binders or books on our desks had to be 1 inch from the wall, never touching the wall. Window shades either all the way up or completely down. Only white notepads, black pens, white post-its, which were discontinued for a little while, causing a panic for the admin team. Ironically, we were supposed to be creative and forward-thinking. The 90s were an odd time in corporate. Story 125. At Disney, you could only color your hair 1 shade lighter or 1 shade darker. My mouth was hanging open when I heard this one. You're hired at the weight you are. You can only lose or gain 10 pounds. I'm naturally thin, but to ask that of someone? Crazy. Story 126. In my previous job, we ran out of printer paper, the normal letterbox size. The boss's son had a great idea. We have a large stock of legal, longer paper. Let's cut them to size and use that instead. Managers were like you on about those cost more than regular paper, and why don't you just order the usual paper stock from Staples like we asked you to? Then he tried to touch our department. We ran out of adhesives. He mandated that we start using the alternative, which was lubricant. Yeah, that lasted like 1 hour for my coworker. Guy set him straight with only 1 chat with his father. If you don't know the work, don't butt in. The trick to good business is to just leave the good workers alone. Story 127. I worked for an attorney that never said a word to me or anyone else for that matter. He would write everything out by hand, horrible handwriting, and leave it on my desk. I didn't even know I was his secretary. And then it would come back with red pen edits and marks all over it. He never once spoke to me or told me what errors or things I was doing wrong. I tried frequently to ask. This was over 15 years ago during my undergrad. Story 128. All external emails and replies must be approved by me, department manager. She'd take days to get back to people, and we'd burn deadlines and sometimes pay extra and penalties waiting on her. Sometimes a week waiting to get approved, a reply saying that I approve something. She didn't trust anyone and would reword every email. Story 129. At my very first professional role as a sales manager in a big department store, women were required to wear a dress or skirt, no pants allowed, pantyhose, and high heels standing on hard tile floors for up to 15 hours a day. Story 130. We weren't allowed to have fans at our desks. Mind you, our dress code, our dress pants with a blazer, and I live in Phoenix. It was brutal every time our AC went out.